Scarlet slept restlessly on that stormy August night, dreaming that someday she would feel loved and cared for, not by a man, but by a friend or an acquaintance. It had been years since she felt a pleasant touch on her skin, a kind look, and a genuine smile that wasn't uncomfortable or noticeably forced to avoid appearing impolite. She longed for a true friend, someone to talk to and confide in with her problems. She wished to have someone by her side who not only tolerated her but genuinely wanted her in their life. There was something strange about her. Sometimes the young woman couldn't quite understand what it was. Her mere presence unsettled everyone around her, and no matter how much Scarlet tried, others were unable to approach her for a normal conversation. She began to think it was some kind of curse, that she was destined to be alone for the rest of her life. She was known in the neighborhood as a nobody, a lost girl, the ghost. During the early years of her life, she had what she desired so much, a best friend named Ayanna. Every morning, they would meet in front of Scarlet's house and stroll through the streets of their town, chatting about the cartoons they had watched on television that day. Ayanna's family had much more wealth and possessions than Scarlet's, so they often went to Ayanna's house to play video games or swim in the pool during the summer. Ayanna even gifted Scarlet one of her bicycles since Scarlet couldn't afford one. Whenever Scarlet entered that house, the entire family fell silent for an unknown reason. Scarlet's mere presence made them uncomfortable, as if they saw something in her that was not normal, despite Scarlet behaving like any girl her age and having no malice in her being or malicious intentions. Initially, Ayanna didn't see anything strange about her best friend. She enjoyed Scarlet's company. She was a normal, happy girl full of energy. But as they grew older, Ayanna started seeing Scarlet the same way her parents did. There was something about her that she didn't like, although Scarlet had never given her a reason to mistrust her. Scarlet didn't lie, didn't manipulate, she was calm, polite. The only odd thing was her mother, who seemed to always forget the existence of her own daughter. Ayanna's parents tried to force information out of Scarlet every time she stayed for dinner in their home. They wanted to know why a 10-year-old girl would roam the streets alone, not returning home until midnight, entering someone else's home without consulting her parents first. Whenever they requested to speak to her mother, Scarlet would say she wasn't home or that she was working. It was certainly strange. Scarlet always had the same answer to their questions. Her mother didn't care much about what she did, allowing her to do whatever she wanted whenever she wanted, even if it was something potentially dangerous. Ayanna's parents didn't know what to do. It was evident that Scarlet had a highly irresponsible single mother who didn't care about her. Although on the other hand, they lived in a safe neighborhood, and perhaps that's why she granted the little girl so much freedom. They decided not to call the police to report possible abuse, as Scarlet showed no signs of injuries, bruises, or any indication that she was being mistreated. She was a happy and energetic little girl, and there were no signs of a toxic private life. However, everything changed rapidly when the two girls started secondary school. The years passed, and when Scarlet turned 12, her former best friend, Ayanna, completely ignored her. For some strange reason, Scarlet made Ayanna just as uncomfortable as she made her parents. When the dark-haired girl knocked on her door to hang out, no one answered, even though she could see Ayanna's bedroom television turned on from the doorway. At school, Ayanna would go off with other girls, leaving Scarlet alone at her desk, completely isolated. All those friendships that had been formed throughout her childhood were disappearing like smoke in air, without any explanation, without reason. It was as if there was something about her that made other people distance themselves, like when a cat rejects a sick kitten, or when you hear an annoying sound and move away from it. Scarlet turned over in bed, grumbling slightly as she heard the intense rain hitting the wooden rooftop. Occasionally, a lightning bolt would light up the sky accompanied by the roar of thunder. She had never witnessed such a huge storm in her town, and with each passing minute, the lightning seemed to strike closer to her house. In her dreams, those roars and flashes were spirits pursuing her, attempting to drown her in an icy river. Whenever she tried to surface, the thick ice wouldn't allow her to escape. She couldn't scream in her dream, it felt like her mouth was being covered every time she opened it. She tossed and turned, sweating and moaning softly. Finally, a lightning bolt struck so loudly and so close that it jolted her awake, saving her from her nightmare. Scarlet gasped for the air and began to hyperventilate. She could still see that dark river, the hands of the dead trying to drown her, her desperate attempts to break the ice and escape. She sat on the edge of her bed, wiping the cold sweat drops from her forehead with the sleeves of her white summer pajamas. After taking deep breaths and grounding herself in reality, she lay back down, folding the pillow over her ears, trying to ignore the lightning and the thunder that accompanied it. She sighed, realizing that it wasn't going to be easy to sleep that night. Scarlet was a 17-year-old girl of average height, with shoulder-length black hair and gray eyes that appeared ocean green in the sunlight. Her lips were a very pale pink, just like her acne-covered white skin with certain scars. She wasn't exactly attractive, and she didn't care much about taking care of her appearance. Many times she wouldn't even comb her hair or wash her face, and there were even weeks when she didn't want to shower. She carried a deep pain reflected in her eyes at all times, despite her attempts to hide it. Scarlet was unhappy, and she didn't really know why. She always assumed she would be happier if she left the small town where she grew up, but it was clear that wasn't her problem. She felt lost in life, unsure of what to do in the future. Perhaps the reason for her sadness was the lack of maternal love, as her mother wasn't exactly the most affectionate person in the world. Sometimes it seemed like her mother didn't even care about her daughter's health or life. She was a cold woman, always lost in her thoughts, and Scarlet had never seen her happy or content, not even a simple smile. "Is this why I'm like this?" Scarlet thought. Or perhaps it was the absence of a father figure in her life. Her father was a stranger, someone she had never met. Scarlet didn't usually worry much about him, but it was inevitable to wonder what had happened to him. Her mother never told her the truth about that mysterious man, and Scarlet didn't even know if he was alive or dead. Whenever she dared to ask, her mother would pretend she didn't hear her. And her relatives? She didn't have any relatives nearby, or at least that's what she thought. Her mother was a woman who kept secrets locked away in her mind. Scarlet was always interested in knowing about her mother's past, where she came from, the relationship her mother had with her grandparents. But her mother never spoke, she was always lost in her thoughts. Sometimes, when Scarlet had dinner alone and saw her mother sitting in the living room armchair, she imagined what might have happened in her past. Maybe she had a fight with her parents when she got pregnant with me, maybe my grandparents died in an accident when she was young, maybe she ran away from home with my father. Maybe she was a very loving woman who became cold when she found out about the death of the man she loved the most. Another lightning bolt struck a few kilometers away from her house. Scarlet counted the seconds in her head until she heard the thunder. She got up from bed again, realizing she wouldn't be able to sleep that night. Right below her room was the living room. Her house was old, as could be seen from the decor, as her mother had no interest in changing it to her liking when she bought it. The armchairs seemed to have survived a civil war, the walls were a dirty yellow color, and the dusty curtains always concealed the transparent door leading to the garden. Fawny was Scarlet's mother. Her hair was a very dark reddish color, but she had dyed it black to avoid being recognized. It also prevented Scarlet from asking more about her father's life, as she inherited his dark hair. Most nights, Fawny spent her time watching television, particularly the news, to find out what was happening in the human world. Just like her daughter, she couldn't sleep either, and watching TV relaxed her enough to keep her from feeling tense. However, that night, the television made her even more nervous. Fawny listened attentively to the news report, her expression filled with concern as the blonde woman spoke. These past few days, we have witnessed the deaths of hundreds of animals, including birds, squirrels, and even pets like cats and dogs. Scientists claim it's a virus that spreads through contact among certain animals but doesn't affect humans. Fani straightened up and rubbed her chin, lost in thought. She was a hypochondriac, always believing that any strange occurrence in the world meant something horrible was about to happen and that she should flee. But every time she prepared to do so, nothing happened. She was safe, at least that's what they assured her on the day she fled from her own home. However, there was a voice inside her telling her to run, that she couldn't escape her destiny. She took a deep breath. "Nothing's wrong, we are safe," she reminded herself. For 17 years, Fani had been unable to sleep well at night due to what had happened years prior. She knew that someday she had to return to her true world and stop taking refuge in another. She hated being in this situation. Throughout her life, she had always been brave, fighting against various enemies, but at that moment, she felt like a coward. A coward who had let down her world. What would she do with Scarlet if she really had to flee? Would she tell her the truth? Would she take her with her? Fani knew she wasn't the best mother in the world, and she could see that her daughter thought the same thing about her. Maybe if she disappeared from her life, Scarlet would be happier and safer. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. Her daughter was not like others, which was why she was so marginalized at school. Humans reject what they don't understand, she thought to herself. Meanwhile, in Scarlet's room, the teenager was lying on her back, gazing at the ceiling and murmuring a made-up song under her breath, trying to calm herself enough to fall back asleep. She was almost successful, her eyelids grew heavier, and she felt that she would drift off to sleep any moment now. But suddenly, another bolt of lightning struck, shaking the house. The teenager grumbled and turned over in bed, frustrated by the constant noise. The sudden flash of light illuminated the room, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Scarlet knew that falling back asleep would be a challenge now, as her senses were heightened by the disturbance. She listened to the raindrops tapping against her window and the howling wind outside, hoping to find solace in their familiar sounds. However, her mind remained alert, unable to relax fully in the face of the storm's disruptions. But she could swear that amid the wind and the raindrops hitting against her window, she heard a faint melody, mimicking her own tune. It was the voice of a woman murmuring her song from outside. The girl noticed, straining her ears to make sure she heard it correctly. For a few seconds, only the sound of rain splashing against her window and the wind rustling the leaves in her garden could be heard. Scarlet shook her head, thinking it was simply her imagination and lack of sleep. But as soon as she lay back down in her bed, she heard it again, this time clearer. It was her melody, without a doubt. "What?" Scarlet uttered. Scarlet got out of bed, her bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. She quickly ran towards the window, opening it wide in search of the voice. The wind and rain lashed against her face, but she was focused on what was happening outside. She examined her garden, filled with puddles and mud, but found nothing out of the ordinary. However, she heard it again, unquestionably a voice imitating her song, and this time it was behind her. It was a voice akin to a siren. It bounced off the walls, echoing through the house like dancing and traveling through the rooms. Surprisingly, Scarlet didn't feel scared. She was rather curious. She thought it could be her mother, but she doubted it because she had never heard her mother sing. Without second thoughts, Scarlet followed the voice, traversing the old hallways of her house, the wood creaking and squeaking under her feet with each step. The voice seemed to be guiding her towards the garden. There came a point where Scarlet couldn't stop her legs, she was automatically following the voice. She walked slowly through the corridors, following the melodious and joyful voice singing that beautiful melody. She couldn't stop even if she wanted to. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Someone was outside, in the middle of the night, amidst a dangerous storm. Fani slowly rose from her chair, leaving the living room vacant and the door leading to the garden unprotected. As she reached the door, she peeked through the peephole, her heart racing. She felt something in her chest, a feeling that she should run away. But she let out a sigh of relief upon seeing that familiar figure on her porch, holding a bag of food. She quickly opened the door, frowning. "What are you doing here, Michael?" Fani asked, her tone as cold as ever. "I thought I told you not to never come to my house." The brown-haired man standing at the door smiled upon seeing that Fani was still awake. Michael was Fani's co-worker. They both worked at a car workshop, and ever since he first saw her 17 years ago, he wanted to be by her side. Fani showed up at the workshop one day when she was only 25 years old, or at least that's what she appeared to be. Michael's father, the owner of the workshop, asked if she needed help. Fani stared at him for a while, looking confused and vulnerable, unable to speak. A 22-year-old Michael managed to strike up a conversation with her. All he could gather from her was a confession that she had run away from home and had just arrived in that town. Michael convinced his father to give her a position at the workshop to help her get back on her feet, despite not knowing about Fani's experience. They placed her as a receptionist, but it didn't take long for them to realize that Fani was a smart girl. She could figure out what was wrong with the broken cars in a matter of seconds and fix them easily. Customers came to the workshop for the amazing service she provided, but they felt intimidated by her presence. Michael was completely drenched, holding a paper bag with the logo of a fast food chain in his left hand. He was one of the few people Fani spoke to, but it was because he wouldn't stop bothering her. Fani was attractive, but she had no desire to have a romantic relationship with a mere human. She made that very clear to him. Michael understood, but he couldn't help being attracted to her.
"Good evening to you too, Olivia."
Michael joked, already used to Fani's bad mood.
"My car broke down in front of your house. Do you mind if I grab a few tools to fix it? I'll give you my food in return."
Fani, now known as Olivia, crossed her arms, sighed, and shook her head. She didn't believe him since Michael worked at a car workshop, and it was highly unlikely for his car to break down out of nowhere. "Do you expect me to believe that your car broke down in front of my house?" she asked. "You work at a car workshop, Michael." Michael stepped aside, showing Fani that his black car was indeed on the road, emitting smoke. Fani's eyes widened when she realized he was actually telling the truth this time. "Well, grab the tools you need, but do it quickly. I'm going to bed soon. You don't have to give me anything in return," she said, opening the door. Michael walked past Fani on the left, hurrying towards the kitchen. He was wearing a blue plaid shirt and black jeans, which was not something Fani was used to seeing on him. He usually wore his old hoodie with sweatpants, not so formal. As he searched for some tools in the kitchen, he played with his wet brown hair, bending down to look through the drawers. "What are you doing on the road during the storm?" Fani asked, lying on the kitchen doorway frame. "You idiot."
"Yeah, I'm a bit foolish. I was hungry and craving a burger with fries,"
he explained, laughing as he uttered those last words. Fani shook her head and rolled her eyes. "I guess I understand." But Fani didn't truly understand. Humans were so fragile, any earthquake, any tsunami, a simple blaze could kill them. Yet, they risked their lives just to seek out food that would harm their bodies even more. Michael opened another drawer.
"How's your daughter?"
he asked. Fani immediately noticed he mentioned her daughter, even though she had never spoken about Scarlet. She placed her hand on an empty wine bottle that was on the countertop, ready to attack him from behind. Inside, she felt immense fear, as if she had been discovered. "How do you know I have a daughter?" she asked back. Michael continued rummaging, making a lot of noise.
"Don't you remember? My daughter goes to the same high school as her. She says she's always alone and too afraid to speak up in class. Does she have any issues?
He inquired. Scarlet couldn't make friends because of her bloodline. She wasn't exactly human like them, and the students could sense it deep down. It was in their nature to distance themselves from her automatically. Her daughter had fallen into a deep depression due to the constant bullying and harassment she had to endure. Maybe it's time to tell Scarlet the truth, she'll understand, Fonny thought. I don't know, I think she's just dealing with typical teenage problems, she lied. Michael sighed.
I guess we've all had our fair share of troubles in our adolescence, haven't we?
Michael asked. I guess so. Fonny lied again, scratching her cheek, tired of constantly lying. Adolescence wasn't a problem in her world, but in the human world, it was a rite of passage. Scarlet had a valid reason to be depressed. Her body knew she wasn't in her home, and the other humans knew it too, which is why they unconsciously distanced themselves. Fonny felt a certain sorrow, understanding that Scarlet would never be happy in a place where she didn't belong. And your daughter doesn't want to be her friend? Fonny asked, biting her nails out of remorse.
Well, she hasn't mentioned anything, but I'll talk to her.
Michael replied. Michael was taking a while to find that tool, and Fonny didn't like having company at her home. She wanted to find a way to get rid of him. Rolling her eyes, she approached Michael to try to help him. Do you need some? Fonny was about to speak but stopped herself when she noticed that the collar of Michael's shirt wasn't fixed properly at the back. As she reached to fix it, she examined it closely and noticed a strange black line on his skin. It was a tattoo, something she had never seen on him before. It was a simple tattoo of a sun made with lines. Fonny knew the true meaning behind that tattoo. It wasn't an innocent tattoo. Michael finally grabbed a wrench and immediately stood up.
Thanks for letting me borrow the...
Fonny could no longer hold back her anger and fear. The sharp blade of her knife was pressed lightly against Michael's throat. He raised his hands in surrender, his eyes showing a hint of fear, but deep down it was all a facade to try and deceive Fonny.
If you didn't want me to take the tools, you could have just said no.
He joked nervously. Fonny stared at him menacingly, fully aware of what this person truly was. It wasn't Michael, it was the killer who had taken advantage of and assumed his form. Despite not having seen the species for almost 20 years, she knew that their intentions were far from good. Why are you here? Fonny demanded to know. Michael remained silent, deliberately trembling his hands and legs to make it more convincing. Fonny could see through the act. She was a smart woman. Realizing that he couldn't deceive her, Michael gave up and smirked wickedly, reveling in being caught red-handed. His hands were still raised in the air, and his smile mocked her. Fonny felt scared and helpless without her powers.
You caught me.
He finally admitted.
You're still as clever as you were 20 years ago.
Fonny moved the knife closer, but Michael didn't seem too concerned about it. He knew that Fonny was weak and that she wouldn't be able to kill him as easily as she did 17 years ago. She looked pathetic.
You must be wondering why I'm here. That Michael guy lent me his form, and I just wanted to see you again.
He explained. I don't know how you've managed to come here, but I want you out of my house and out of this world, Fonny ordered. The smile on that thing's face grew with each insult Fonny hurled at it.
Why did you come to this world? Those extra 17 years don't suit you well. You look like an old woman, despite how beautiful you used to be,
it mockingly said. Fonny didn't move an inch, but she was ready to do so, ready to use her reflexes as soon as the creature attacked. What are you doing here, shapeshifter? She asked. The shapeshifter was, as the name implies, a being that could change its form at any time. It could transform into any animal and/or person, easily deceiving everyone.
Maliz sent me.
They replied. Fear widened Fani's eyes upon hearing that name being mentioned after 17 years. A shiver ran down her spine as she remembered what happened with that man years before. All the bad memories flooded back into her mind, and she tightened her grip on the knife. Maliz? Does Maliz know where I am? Fani asked, bringing the knife even closer to the creature's neck.
Correction, he knows where both of you are. Did you really think Maliz wouldn't know anything about your beloved little daughter?
Mocked the shapeshifter. While everything was unfolding in the kitchen, Scarlet was in the living room. Her ears only captured the sound of the song that had her hypnotized, not the words or the noises coming from the kitchen. She was too busy chasing the person calling her with that song. It came from outside, from her garden. She pushed aside the curtains that concealed the large glass door. With both hands, she grabbed the old door, exerting a considerable amount of force to open it. It made a high-pitched and annoying sound as she did so. Immediately, the room filled with cold air and dampness, and the gray carpet soaked up the rainwater. But she still heard the voice. Scarlet's eyes lit up as she walked slowly through the garden. Her bare feet got covered in mud, and her clothes became drenched. Despite shivering from the cold, she couldn't stop following the voice. Among all the puddles that had formed due to the heavy storm, there was one in particular in the middle of the garden that caught her attention. She could swear the song was coming from that puddle, and within it, she could see a small blue light dancing around and singing. Scarlet crouched down, her fingertips only millimeters away from touching the puddle, but her state of hypnosis was shattered by a sharp scream calling out her name. Scarlet! She recognized that voice. It was her mother's. She had never heard her mother scream, let alone call her name with such desperation. That scream was loud enough to snap her out of her trance. She jerked her head violently in search of her mother and noticed that the scream came from the kitchen. She ran back inside, following her mother's cries instead of the voice. She left the living room covered in muddy footprints and water until she reached the kitchen, where she encountered a surprising scene. There was a mouse on the floor, circling around Scarlet's mother. Fani used her feet to try to kill it, but when she caught its tail with the heel of her foot, the small creature grew and burst open, releasing feathers, transforming into a bald eagle. The woman with dyed black hair knew she had to flee. Without her powers, she was defenseless against that being. She grabbed Scarlet's arm and began to tug. "They're here! We have to go!" Fani shouted. "What are you talking about, Mom? Who's here?" Scarlet cried, holding on to her mother. Fani and her daughter began to flee, with her mother guiding her towards the front door. But the eagle grabbed onto Scarlet's hair with its claws and dragged her back into the kitchen. Scarlet let out a cry for help, holding onto the door frame. Fani immediately knew what to do. Beneath the floor, hidden beneath one of the floorboards, laid one of the most powerful weapons she had ever wielded in her life, a weapon that she should have destroyed years ago in her youth. With all her strength in her legs, Fani kicked the floorboard, breaking it into pieces and retrieving a long sword from the wreckage. The sword emitted what appeared to be purple electric-like sparks. The eagle quickly noticed the weapon and recoiled, landing on the ground. Scarlet held her cheek, which had deep cuts from the sharp talons of the bird. She quickly got up, searching for her mother and seeking answers. The teenager's cheeks were covered in blood and rainwater, but Fani was more concerned about what she held in her hands. "I need you to take this outside. We need to go to a safer place," her mother ordered. "Hold it tightly. Don't let it touch anybody." Fani handed the sword to Scarlet. However, Scarlet was fixated on what was happening behind her mother's shoulder. The eagle was growing larger and larger, its feathers exploding and transforming into green, sharp scales. It continuously grew as it destroyed the kitchen and teared a massive hole in the house. Rain poured down on them, and they could see how the eagle had turned into a horrifying and fearsome creature, with yellow claws and bloodthirsty teeth. Standing in front of their house was a green dragon, with enormous black eyes filled with a desire to destroy. It was bathed in yellow tint light from the street lamps. Its tail was so long and flexible that it immediately wrapped around Fawny's waist. "Let me go!" Fawny shouted. Without thinking clearly and ignoring her mother's instructions, Scarlet attempted to lift the sword and strike the beast to free her mother. However, the weapon was too heavy. Her arms failed her. Scarlet was not physically strong, and she was exhausted and injured from all the running. Everything happened so fast yet, in a way, in slow motion. The dragon grabbed Scarlet's mother, who struggled to break free, and launched her into the air in the opposite direction. Fawny didn't have time to scream. She was simply propelled out of sight. Scarlet stared in horror at the spot where her mother had been moments ago, soaring through the air. She was utterly confused, unable to comprehend what was happening, but deep down, she knew that her mother couldn't have survived such a high-speed fall from such a height. Mom," she whispered. The girl was now alone, clutching a dangerous sword in her hands, her face drenched in a mixture of blood, tears, and rain. She had always believed that when her mother died, things would stay the same. Her mother had never been there when she needed her, never cared about her well-being. They didn't have a relationship. How could she miss such a neglectful mother? Scarlet was mistaken. She felt rage, pain, a pure sense of hatred that made her want to destroy anything in her path and make that dragon suffer. Her mother was her only family, and now she was an orphan, completely alone. She had nothing left. Letting go of the sword, she ran after the dragon, which was walking away from her as if in search of Fawny. Scarlet grabbed a stone from the ground and hurled it at the dragon. "Coward," she shouted, desperate. The dragon turned around, glaring at her with a stoic look.
"What are you doing exactly? You can't do much,"
it reminded her. She threw another stone which grazed its leg. The dragon simply observed her, and it noticed that the girl had thrown away the only thing that could kill. The sword was out of her reach. The shapeshifter smiled, realizing it had an advantage.
"Maliz told me that you're weak, that you wouldn't be able to stop me even if you wanted to."
The dragon disappeared, transforming into the silhouette of a person, specifically, a woman. Her hair was fiery red, cascading down to her hips, and her lips were bubblegum pink with slightly crooked teeth that formed a malevolent smile. She wore a green medieval dress and brown knee-high boots. From her boots, she pulled out a sharp knife, the same one Fawny had held minutes before. "Maliz Fern will be delighted to hear about the death of Fawny Waster's daughter," the shapeshifter said coldly. With a quick motion, it brought the knife to Scarlet's throat. But it didn't graze her neck. An unknown force stopped the shapeshifter's hand. It was stunned as it let go of the weapon and turned its gaze to Scarlet. Scarlet's eyes gleamed with a green hue, shedding tears that ran all the way down her chin. She was breathing heavily, trying to maintain her composure, but it was clear that she was very angry. She had her eyes fixed on the shapeshifter, and suddenly the creature began to have a twitch its head. She recoiled and started trembling. A sudden cry of anguish was let out as she grasped her shirt, throwing herself to the ground, writhing in pain. A black cloud surrounded her, and a bright light emerged from her eyes. She held in agony until she turned to dust, dissolving into the rain-soaked ground. Scarlet's eyes stopped gleaming and returned to their normal gray hue. Her vision became incredibly blurry. She saw a white haze and her eyelids grew heavier with each passing moment. Her muscles gave in, her legs no longer able to support her weight, and she collapsed onto the ground, succumbing to exhaustion, landing in the puddle that had formed in her garden.